the political discussion we will have now, or the policy roundtable. We're happy to have newly a roundtable here in the room. I present to you, you already know him, MEP from Slovenia, Matjaž Nemec, who is in the group of Socialists and Democrats in Europe and a member of the Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs Committee. On my left, we have Patricia Heidegger, who is Deputy Secretary General at the European Environmental Bureau. We're also very happy to welcome Professor Doris Fuchs, also here to my right, who is Director at the Research Institute for Sustainability, Helmholtz Center in Potsdam, and Professor for Sustainable Development at University of Münster. So we're very happy to also hear about how citizen participation can maybe improve sustainability and climate policies. And last but not least, we have Konstantin Schäfer, who is Director for EU Relations and Projects at IFOC. And I think we're going to hear more about that and their work in a second. Once we have our political discussion, we will also have a slot to interact with the audience. So we will hear from each of our speakers, and then we'll open the floor for questions and sense-making together with everybody here. We will then kindly ask Petteri Repo, who is a research director at the Center for Consumer Society Research at the University of Helsinki, who will be listening deeply and come back to us with some sense-making, hopefully, or at least a mapping of the questions that we need to address moving forward. And certainly we look forward to the closing remarks, key takeaways for all of us from Mr. Janez Potočnik, former Commissioner for Science, Research and Environment, and a co-chair of the UNEP International Resource Panel. I think more COP learnings will also come from you. We will have a networking opportunity after we're done with this first part. We'll have some refreshments. We'll have a chance to interact further with each other and the amazing participation as well in the room. And after that, we'll go into the parallel sessions. So if that's clear, and I see some people nodding that it's okay, I would say let's get started. I know you can only be with us for about 10 minutes, so I will ask you all the questions now quickly. Mr. Nemec, from the European Parliament's perspective, I mean, we've heard a lot of examples of when citizen participation doesn't work, what is needed for it to work, what could civic innovation look like, in the democratic innovation look like in the future. I'm very curious to bring it now to practice. From a policymaker's perspective, where does citizen participation actually improve policymaking? And if you give us some examples also of the complications, but maybe also the successes of involving citizens in the work that you do. Thank you
so much. It will take you 3 or 4 minutes before I go to the vote. We have an extraordinary vote, a long and important vote in the LIBE committee. Yeah, allow me just to say some words about the, let's say, the reality that we are facing daily here in this house. The composition of the parliament, it's quite different than it used to be in the last mandates. We have a strong far-right, 2 groups, the Patriots and the ECR during this mandate, and you can feel the reinforcement coming from the right side of the parliament. Also, when it comes to the politics, it seems like that. During these crazy days, where every day we are hit with news that feel like the democracy is slipping away. That we need something to grab. We need something to, let's say, to hope. And you are that kind of person that we have to beat on for the next, let's say, future when it comes to the European Union. Of course, we are entering in an interesting decade of profounding transformation. Of course, we already mentioned the climate changes, digitalization, geopolitical reframement, and a power shift. Of course, a rise in inequality, and these shifts affects also, let's say, our economies, but the European way of life, let's say it like it is. And more people feel that the politics is happening far away from their everyday realities. I'm often asked, what can we do as regular citizens to, let's say, reframe or reshape a political, let's say, landscape? we are learning that the change has come from the bottom up, because the let's say actual politicians, they will not change their points of view, and we have to make them to change their opinion. In the last 6 months, we faced an amazing, let's say, campaign, and it started from Slovenia, and it's called My Voice, My Choice movement. And this time really shaped, let's say the European Parliament, because the campaign was amazing. The campaign started 6 months ago, and it's about the let's say abortion rights, reproductive rights. And I will expose as a good example, let's say, and one of the strongest bottom-up, let's say, civil mobilizations in recent European history, that makes a difference. They faced let's say, huge issues, procedural one, and we have Jure here. Jure is a master of the European Parliament procedure, and it was very difficult, and he jumped in. He helped them from the very beginning. And for them, the European Parliament and the European institution, they were like a labyrinth from the very beginning. For them was impossible to get the result. The starting point wasn't that optimistic in the very beginning, but their campaign touched, let's say, the core of the individual political frame, because they actually examined all the MEPs, starting with the, let's say, their own promises coming from the campaign, and they exposed them dramatically in their home countries. And they just said to them, "Come on, you promised to your voters, to your citizens, that you will manage those issues," and actually they did it. The most challenging thing was to split the biggest parliamentarian group, EPP, and they did it. Actually, they managed, and that was an amazing story that teaches us that even those initiatives that are coming from bottom up, from the civil society, from the citizens, from the Europeans, can reach, let's say, a good result. And I really want to expose this on a good example, and it's still ongoing, because now the decision is on the Commission. But I mean, we have a good starting point that also the Commission cannot avoid, let's say, the majority that this initiative reached in the European Parliament. This could be also for you a good example how to manage that kind of situation. I mean, and that kind of initiatives give me a lot of hope that we are still able as a society to reconnect ourselves and to bring some kind of prosperity to, let's say, to our citizens. I mean, and I think that this could be let's say, a learning lessons for all of us. Yeah, and a good example. Thank you.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And I hope you can still... I know you need to leave soon, so already a huge thank you again for hosting us and allowing this event to happen. We will see if we manage to still see you after the vote, and if not, I believe on behalf of everybody here and online, we are extremely grateful for all your support. It's great to see policymakers that take civic participation such seriously and to the heart of their work. I'm curious to hear also from the Professor Fuchs. You have done quite some research on civic participation. We've heard of a positive example. I'm curious from your perspective, if we look at the complexity of our times and the need for systemic approach to all the issues we are facing in Europe, do you have some words of wisdom of where civic participation is a must rather than a nice to have? And have you seen models or examples where civic participation is counterproductive? Just to be a bit a bit critical here. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I'm going to report a lot on our project, of course, that we've had for the 3 years now. Before I go into what works and what doesn't work, let me make one more fundamental comment, however, and that is the different crises that we're facing and what you were referring to in terms of polarization, democratic backsliding, but also the ecological crises. They're not just parallel, they're interdependent, they're really co-constitutive. And that's something we have to take into account with everything we do. And that's why participation in this context is never a nice to have. It's always a must. And the question is, how do you do it well? And the worst we can do, and that relates to what was just said, but also what was said earlier, is to have participation that is that just signals participation, but doesn't actually imply it. And that's also what citizens have told us again and again, both in the case studies we did and in the democracy labs, is that we need to involve them, involve everybody. So participation needs to be inclusive. And inclusive not just in getting people to the table, but in also letting everybody have their voice heard, and not only those who are very comfortable, to speak at the table, but everybody needs to be transparent, both in terms of what is happening at the table, but also beyond it to the outside. And it needs to be impactful. Right, and that doesn't mean that we forget about representative democracy. Representative democracy has a really important role to play, but we need to integrate citizen participation in innovative forms, like we looked at, with representative democracy, so that it doesn't feel like, well, we're just engaging citizens, but nothing comes out of it. And that's also why the results that were mentioned from both the Conference of Europe, but also the French Citizen Assembly, it's really important to create transparency about these beyond the scientific community, so that citizens have a feeling something comes out of what they do. And it's also what you referred to when you were talking about the COP, right? You can have an amazing civil society forum, but there's no interaction, right? And again, what we need is an institutionalization of having citizen voices heard, creating the transparent, creating the creative space for them, but also the impactful space, because otherwise participation is damaging.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. And I'm delighted to hear that we also have a representative from the European Commission Joint Research Center, Ms. Mara Almeida. I would love to welcome you to this discussion. We heard from the academics, civic participation is a must, not a nice to have. We also heard a lot of people are being left out. Now, at European level, of course, we know that policymaking relies increasingly on digital participation. And I wonder if you can tell us a bit about who is left out of consultations, participation at European level. And maybe there are already some ideas, some works in the process, some good examples on how to not widen, but narrow the inclusivity gap in participating in EU policymaking.
Yeah, I think that's a very big question for the Commission. I can tell you a little bit of the work that the Commission has been doing for quite a long time. I work on the Joint Research Center, and of course the Joint Research Center as a competence center for participatory and deliberative democracy for many years, and has been doing quite a lot of work also in the Commission in terms of mainstreaming the practices of democratic innovations. It has been involved, for instance, in the Young Pollinators Assembly organized with the Parliament. So there is quite a lot of initiatives that the Commission has been supporting. And I think it's also, if you have read the European Democracy Shield that was published in November last year, is interesting to see some of the policy roadmap that you were suggesting. They are included in the Democracy Shield. If you see the third priority area in terms of boosting societal resilience and citizen engagement. There is quite a lot of focus on media literacy, on democratic skills, but also in turn, for instance, training of civil servants in public administration. So I think there is an effort on working in that direction. And I think also, for instance, the Center for Democratic Resilience really wants to be on the ground, close to NGOs, close to civil society. So I think having a close network of the people working on citizens' engagement will be important to understand what different things are happening in different member states. So that's one side. I think the other side is also the work that the JRC has been doing on the project that I'm actually leading, which is the Future of Democracy project, which we have worked very closely with experts from the at international level. Actually, some of them are here, which have worked in the project. And the first report coming out of that project, the scoping report, is going actually to be published from next week. And in that report, what we asked the experts, working very closely with them, was what do they thought were the future challenges for democracy? And actually, one of them was exactly about the how we call it the unfulfilled potential of democratic innovations, in the sense that is a risk if democratic innovations will do the same mistakes as representative democracy, in the sense of not including the people which are more marginalized from groups which is much more difficult for them to be part of these exercises. So how are we able to use this exercise to be more inclusive, more diverse, and reaching really to groups of people which normally are very much outside of the political engagement, both from democratic institutions, innovations, but also on the representative side? Because that also comes from another challenges. This was 10 challenges that we identified. And the other one was really the increasing of the representation gap that we think is happening and will be even stronger in the future. And if that, and the question is if that issue of the representation gap is leading people to be more disconnected from institutions, finding other means of expressing themselves, or by supporting the increase of populism or illiberal actors. But we do think that the two things are very much connected. And for us, I think the scoping report has been a good exercise, working very closely with different experts from different disciplines. And I think the aim of the report was really along the report is citizens do need to be listened. It's not only about voting, it can be about democratic innovations, but also how, for instance, we organize referendums or petitions, how that insights are taken out, but also on city halls, how this process are organized always in a very where even the way that the rooms are organized is very distinct, where the citizens are and where the representation power lies. So I think there is quite a lot of work still to be done, even on the process that we have it, like referendum petitions, where a lot of the citizens, many of the times the research shows, feel that on a petition there is no point signing a petition or a referendum that they are not taking into account. So this just to say that the Commission is doing quite a lot of work, especially the JRC, on democracy. And I leave it there.
Thank you for that. We'll take questions also from the audience. I think it will be really interesting to go into who are the citizens that do participate and which citizens are being left behind. But I think we'll have more chances to discuss about that. I would like to bring it back to very much the practice of digital participation. So I come back to you, Mr. Scheffer. I know that you work with consultations and digital participation, and I wonder if you can tell us from the other side, not from the institutional side, not the academic, but really the practice side. Where does digital participation work? Where do you see it being a challenging way of contributing to policymaking?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'm a practitioner of democratic innovations and mostly of offline formats. So I'm working a lot with deliberative mini publics, as of course have also been topic of your project here, and especially at the European level, such as the European citizens panels that we have designed and implemented during the conference on the future of Europe that you mentioned. By the way, we have also 2 participants from the citizen panels in the room with us. So these are the people that participate that you can interview here. And since then, since the conference on the future of Europe, we did it, I think, 7 times already for the European Commission, that we implemented very policy-focused, specific citizen panels for different topics. And as such, I've seen how offline participation works and that it has transformative effects, not only for the people who participate, as these 2, but also for the administrators, for the people who are just circling around these citizen panels. And there's a special magic when people come together, sitting together in a room, sitting together around a table. And I find it interesting that it also very much shows in your results that people also see that, and people demand to create this magic and come together, demanding spaces for that. And so that doesn't mean that online digital tools, for example, do not have a value, but also in your research results, I think some people wished for e-participation tools, and we try, of course, also especially for the younger generations in projects where we work with younger generations to also use them more. Maybe starting with even in our offline processes, we often we pair virtual sessions with offline sessions. First of all, because especially at the EU level, there's great distances to cover when you want to come together into a space. So it saves, of course, costs and energy of time of people. But it can also even increase inclusivity. It's not, of course, there's a digital gap, and we've talked also about the barriers of e-participation tools. But there's also a lot of people who cannot travel so easily and who have problems to leave home for a weekend session, to maybe have mobility restrictions, who care for other people. So it can be, if done well, also have positive effects on inclusion, to sometimes go to virtual digital online spaces. Of course, they have their own challenges, screen fatigue especially, and for older generations, maybe how to use these tools. But online sessions in general, I think, are a good addition to the offline formats that we have. And maybe, of course, with the advent of artificial intelligence and large language models, we also increasingly use digital tools in our offline processes. And maybe just to mention, I think, 3 purposes that we use it for. I think first, and that's maybe counterintuitive, is we want to make the offline experience more human by using digital tools. What I mean by that, we want to make it more efficient, and we want, as facilitators of these processes, to concentrate more on the human experience of people and the human interconnectedness. And good AI tools that we use now can allow for that, as they can serve as assistants in our facilitation by, for example, recording the meetings, transcribing the meetings, translating maybe discussions, summarizing key arguments, cluster different topics on the table. So making sense out of what citizens say and making and helping us to support also output generation. For example, from my experience, I know that generating text together with people who are not used to generate text as a final recommendation or final output is very difficult, very challenging for people, and some tools can help people and make the process more efficient. Maybe the second purpose we use it for is really to try to make the process more inclusive. So as Doris Fuchs said, it's not enough to bring the people at the table and to invite them. We also need to give them a voice in the processes. And AI tools can help to translate, for example, from difficult into easy language. They can measure also how the influence of people are in the discussion, whether someone is having a big impact or someone else has a very low impact on the final recommendation. And we can try to balance that better with tools that we have. And they also allow, or some tools allow for very individualized learning journeys that for every level of knowledge that you have at the table. For example, we're working now with with chatbots that can answer any citizen's individual questions by feeding information materials into these chatbots. And last purpose, maybe that's a bit aside, maybe, of course, these tools can gather, collect, analyze, summarize large amounts of data. And this is especially powerful for us when a mini public that we work with tries to engage with a maxi public. And this, for example, the European Commission, they also have their citizen engagement platform where there's also, of course, some technical barriers towards participating there. But it's very important, I think, that we can then make sense out of large number of contributions for the mini public to then work with these. And maybe just, okay, then bottom line, I think these tools have huge potential also for making these processes more efficient and more inclusive. But of course, I also don't want to shy away from all the risks and challenges that come with it. You've talked the lack of transparency, for example, that often is associated with these tools, but also hallucinations and biases that can be introduced. So I don't want to shy away from it, but I think as long as people can stay in control and can stay in the loop when using these tools and use these tools for offline purposes, then I think it's very powerful.
Thank you for that. I think there's a lot we can discuss about bias and reinforced bias, but I want to leave it to the audience as well. So I still want to introduce you one more speaker before we also can give the floor to you to ask questions. And I have next to me Patricia Heidegger from the European Environmental Bureau. I love that we heard from Mr. Nemetz about a very positive example, My Voice, My Choice, a very interesting campaign that I have personally been following and supporting as well. But I also know that when it comes to environmental policy, things are, let's say, complicated or a bit more nuanced. So I would love to hear from you. How do you see citizen participation? Does it really influence outcomes? Does it risk being sometimes a consultative, I don't want to say theater because it sounds too negative, but exercise that maybe is also bringing citizens to distrust institutions? I would love to hear some examples. Still, if you can, from practice, it would be amazing.
Great, wonderful. Hello, everybody. I'm Patricia from the European Environmental Bureau. EcoUnion, for instance, is part of our family of nearly 200 environmental citizens organizations in Europe, and we have around 30 million Europeans in our network who are engaged and organized in environmental organizations. So obviously we're busy fighting the triple planetary crisis, but we're also busy fighting the crisis of democracy that we've been talking about. So I relate very much to what you said about all these crises obviously being interrelated. And we've been engaging for quite some years now into the debate on kind of innovations and democracy. We were also part of the Conference on the Future of Europe as organized civil society. We also engaged in a Horizon project on citizens' deliberation for the transition. So I very much relate to the discussion this morning. I'd like to share a few concrete examples from recent developments around the need to kind of double down our efforts around participatory democracy at the European level. And I think you spoke about in your different pillars, you spoke about the need to strengthen the foundation. So, I mean, we're talking about innovations, which is great, but I think we're in a time where we're actually fighting to keep the foundations and to strengthen them. So just a few examples. The European Citizens Initiative has already been mentioned. It's the key tool for direct democracy in the EU. It's being promoted by the European Commission and the institutions and as a key tool, but only a fraction of the ECIs that have been submitted actually resulted in tangible policy results, even where citizens managed to get clearly beyond the threshold of the needed signatures. We've been following very closely, just as one concrete example, because you wanted those, a recent one which has been declared as one of the most successful ECIs in terms of visibility. It was the Cage Age ECI about animal farming. It got more than 1.4 million validated signatures, and the Commission had formally committed already in 2021 that it would follow up with a legal with legislation on that ECI. Now, that has never happened. We've never seen a legislative proposal. There have been very unclear, also shifting explanation why this is not happening. And what we're also seeing is kind of massive industry lobby influence here, kind of overshadowing what the citizens have said through the ECI, even though it met all the democratic requirements. So I think the message that this is sending is very clear. It's basically telling people, well, your participation is without impact, and this is more of a symbolic exercise. So I think what we need to see here is very clear, and I think that also refers back to some of your findings. You called it the right to response, which I think is very apt. We need clear obligations for the legislators to respond with legislative proposals. There should be some kind of an independent following monitoring to track implementation, and also kind of just more clarity around why follow-up is not possible. Another example I wanted to mention is around the current so-called omnibus process, which we believe is a very dangerous erosion of democratic safeguards at the moment. So we're currently witnessing what we call a deregulation drive in the name of simplification, where we've seen a lot of environmental and health protections being undermined, by the way, without any scientific evidence that the current laws are not effective, or that they were to create a lot of bureaucratic burden. Anyhow, but looking more at the process, not so much at the substance, the Ombudswoman found with the first omnibus package that there was basically a total lack of public consultation, no impact assessment, and limited transparency. So again, citizens' participation is kind of treated as optional and not as a core democratic requirement, with the Commission undermining its own better regulation standards and obligations. So we believe that we need mandatory consultations, even where we need to fast-track files, because there are crises, yes, but quality policy making can never happen without proper scrutiny and consultation. And by the way, there's currently a call for evidence on the better regulation framework. So if you haven't inputted to that one, please do, because we need all the evidence that we need better regulation and that we need to strengthen and not water down better regulation. And finally, and I'll keep that very short because it's been mentioned, I mean, shrinking civic space and attacks on civil society organizations, especially the ones like us who really engage in advocacy and policy making, that has been very much visible coming from within that very house. And I believe this is also a very dangerous trend. We have seen narratives that basically question the legitimacy of civil society organizations, of organized citizens organizations. Even things like sending letters to members of parliament has been, argued that this was not legitimate and that only individual citizens can do that. They cannot channel their voices through organizations like ours. All of these narratives are emerging very strongly even within the European Parliament itself, and that ultimately weakens, of course, citizens' participation, because civil society acts as a bridge between individual citizens, their interests, and policymakers, because most people don't have the time to engage in very technical or lengthy policy-making processes because they have a life to live and they have a job to work and a family to take care of. So also here we believe that it's extremely important that we safeguard access to decision makers also by organized civil society, and that we get some kind of equal footing with corporate lobbyists that are continuously taking more space to the detriment of citizens' interests, common interests, public health interests, and so on and so forth, and that we get more legal protection as watchdogs and also as advocates for the common or the public interest. So yeah, I have many more comments on all your wonderful findings, but I'll leave it here for the first intervention.
Great. I have a two-part question, and then we move to the audience. I think it's time to open the floor for what is starting to be a very rich discussion. I did hear one key word, I think, in pretty much every intervention so far, and that is trust. I also read a recent study just from last week that trust in democratic institutions is declining. We also hear trust is absolutely important if we want to co-create solutions for the future. So I'm curious, first from an academic perspective, and then from a European Commission perspective, perhaps, how do we tackle this? If we see citizens and what do we do with citizens who are maybe starting to entrust policymakers or politicians who actually are undermining democracy? How are we battling this chicken and the egg? Where do we start to rebuild trust in democracy? And maybe who should do it? I'm very curious to challenge us a bit to look into that, and then we can go into opening the floor.
Okay. Very, very important questions. Yes, trust is absolutely essential for democracy. The important part is that if we look at the data, we actually don't see trust declining across the board. But along with the increasing representation gap, we see an increasing gap in trust between different segments of society. And that is a huge challenge, because those who with the most distrust are the most difficult to involve in participation. And that's what we really need good strategies for, to get them to the table, to make them being heard. And we don't have all the answers there yet in terms of the methods. Because from a research side, in the past, we've argued that sometimes we even need to overrepresent the marginalized at the table so that they have an equal chance of being heard. Now, our choice experiment tells us that when we ask citizens, they say, no, that shouldn't be the case. They shouldn't be overrepresented, right? So we need to talk about methods there to ensure that the marginalized are included. And we also have to be very careful not to reject their increasing distrust, which opens the door to populism, right? And interacts with it. But we shouldn't too easily reject it as irrational, because we have the representation gap. As we just heard, we have it between the corporate economic interests and citizens, but we also have it between different groups of citizens. And we really need to focus on that, on how to improve that. And as much as, this is a wonderful example of a bottom-up initiative that was given, that won't help us with that problem. Because again, it's a certain type of citizen that will engage in such an initiative. And it's a, one-time successful initiative. We all know how many issues the EU is deciding, in any 1 week. And we can't have such initiatives for each decision the EU makes, and we won't get the people to the table that we really need to focus on a lot.
Thank you for that. Maybe we can come back to Ms. Almeida. Maybe you can tell us a little bit also on these issues of trust. How can others help? You told us a bit about what the European Commission is doing on civic participation, and we'd love to hear more in case there's some other examples. But also, is there a space for everybody in this room that can contribute in terms of institutions, civil society, academia, media? Who should be rebuilding this trust in the demos or in the civic public space in Europe?
Yeah, again, that's a very good question and a difficult question. I think, again, also the work that we have shown has very much shown exactly that the trust on institutions, on democratic institutions, is been declining for the last 20 years. And of course, that has consequences in the way that specific sectors of society interact with the institutions, but also with the democratic processes, and how that has opened the space for support to non-democratic actors across Europe. I think there is a lot of work that the Commission can do, but there is also a lot of work that member states at the national level can do. And that, of course, is not under the competence of the European Commission. I hope, we all hope in the Commission, with the new Center for Democratic Resilience, that there is a bridge and a big platform with the civil society organizations working on the ground, and that there is a much stronger bridge at the local level on the initiatives that are taking place. So I think that's a good starting point on understanding in the member states what is happening, what exercise already happening that actually have good results that could be picked up by other member states that could be interesting. So I think there will need more this mutual learning and sharing of practices that exist. But I also think that would be interesting from what I was hearing, how trying to have some of this suggestion taking place, even if it's a pilot study on a local level where a town hall or a city is willing to take some of these initiatives on board, because by having it in practice and seeing it how it works, then it would be easier for other cities and even at the national level for having some of the initiatives. I think is also another point that I would like to bring is, again, some of the work that we've been doing, which is to do with democratic values. What we have seen, at least from the research that the researchers working with us have shown, is that there is different conceptualizations of democracy. I think the idea that we all have the same conceptualization of democracy is not the case. What the research shows is that for most citizens, democracy is about elections, is about free and fair elections. Democratic values in terms of checks and balances, freedom of the press, the freedom of the courts, that's not so present in most of citizens. What the research shows is that citizens are willing to compromise on that values regarding other issues like economical issues or the party that they normally vote in terms of winning. So that issue of how citizens hold their democratic values should be, for me, or at least the work that the foundation for many of the things. And I would say that democratic values connected with citizens' engagement should be very important. If citizens think that democracy is only about voting, then I think we could be in big trouble, because liberal democracy is much more than that. And how we bring that values to also be ingrained on the exercise of citizens' engagement, I think that would be important. And maybe that's also a way for citizens to understanding the value of institutions, and also institutions understanding that for them to exist, they need the support of citizens.
Thank you, absolutely. And in terms of citizens caring, I think last December we had maybe up to 10 European countries which saw citizens in the streets. So I think we have a lot of examples of how citizens really do care and want to be heard. And speaking about being heard, I think it's time to take some questions and to allow a more participatory interaction with everybody here and online. Kind reminder, you can write your questions in the chat if you're following our event online, and we will be ping-ponging between the room and the online space. Let's see, we have about 20 minutes to have a discussion with the audience, so please feel free. I will ask you, however, so that we are inclusive, to try to keep your interactions maybe up to 1 minute, and speakers to also try to keep it to about 2 minutes, and then that will allow more people to get into dialogue with us. Let's start. Do we have any questions? I see Ines. I just want to see if there's somebody that hasn't spoken yet, and then we come to you, Ines. If not, any questions in the room? All right, we come to you, Ines, then.
Thank you. It's really about the last thing you said. Sorry. One of the things we did found was exactly this, and we did it in the qualitative and quantitative research, that citizens have different perspectives of what democracy is. But another thing that came out of our co-creation process was exactly the need for learning and education about what democracy is and about citizenship. So a lot of the democratic innovations that popped up were not even citizen assemblies, were spaces where people were, and very directed to young people, were learning about what is democracy for you, what needs and what should democracy have, and have a discussion interactively on this. So I was wondering to what extent you've done any work in that direction of actually educating. I don't want to sound patronizing, but actually discussing what democracy is with citizens and from different perspectives. And if there's any democratic innovations that you've developed or worked on that are targeting this issue.
We haven't, so I hope that would be something interesting for people here in the room to do. We haven't done that. We've done more in terms of a review of all the work that there is done by research from different disciplines. And what was proposed was that a democratic culture should be in place, using, for instance, the Council of Europe framework that was produced, I think, in 2018 or 19, and where there is many issues like values, behavior, and how important it is to have democratic competences from a very young age. So it was more focused on that than actually being used or having citizens engagement. That's why that would be quite interesting to have that actually set up, with citizens.
Thank you. I just wanted to quickly add that actually was a proposal also from the Conference on the Future of Europe, that there would be an education program for citizens on democracy. And I don't know if this is being taken up forward, but that was a proposal, right? Yes? These are...
75% of the proposals for the panel to democracy.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think if you'd like to come and tell us a little bit about the process, you're welcome to join. Just an invitation to join the microphone, because otherwise participants online will not hear you. Please.
So, hi, my name is Huub. I was one of the citizen ambassadors of the Conference on the Future of Europe. And there were some things that we found. So you mentioned, I believe, a majority was followed up. That's what the Commission or the Council said, at least. But when we saw a report about what was being followed up, we also saw that many of the legislations were already worked on before the conference even started. So it's a bit of a misleading number. And the more important bits of the proposals that we created, they were neglected. I don't want to say that, but we didn't get a full response. That was something that we specifically asked. That were like, hey, it's okay if there's proposals that are not followed up upon. We get it. It's just an advice that we create. But could you tell us why it's not followed up? So that was something. And I think, I don't know if it was you, but somebody that mentioned there's people that are more easily to talk in a big group, and people who are a bit restrained from that. But we noticed in the physical work groups, especially, that we did work together, and inside or outside of those sessions, we did get to talk with everybody, also the people that were more quiet, and those opinions were still taken into consideration when we kept on discussing this. But Annemie had a different experience with her work group than I did. That being that the chair was a bit. So when the final recommendations were out, the chair played a lot with them to fit them in his agenda. And that was something that there was a bit of a rebellion against that, which I'm very proud of that they did that. But it also shows something about transparency, something about trust or mistrust actually being correct in this case. And that's also something that we noticed, that a lot of the MEPs were very helpful, very supportive of us. Some weren't, and a specific spectrum of the political spectrum, so the right side mostly. But the council was also quite against us. That they played it in a very political way, and they looking back at it, it felt like maybe they were afraid of losing power or something, because what if this becomes a great success? What if citizens get a bigger say in legislation? So we felt there's a bit of a political game as well, while we did not study to become politicians or anything. So it was we had to deal, and yeah.
Over.
Yeah.
Can I add something? So for us, it was also very important that there was a lot of participation, but we didn't have impact, and we agree that everything must come bottom up, but sometimes it has also to be top down. We say we have to talk about it, we have to come to a consensus, and then it's to the politicians. We have chosen them. We are in this kind of democratic system, so we choose our politicians, and then they have to do the job. And very important for us was also, as we have a European identity also, not only a Belgian, but also a European identity. So when you want to be in the club, when you join the club, you have to follow the rules, and the rules have to be clear.
Thank you for that. I'm sure we will hear some anecdotes in the coffee breaks afterwards. Thank you already for the snippets of insight. Do we have other questions? I'm checking both in the room and online. Yes, please.
Thank you. I've found it really interesting. My name is Emma, and I work with Oxfam in Europe, and we work on inequality in Europe. And we have done a lot of work with many, many thousands of young people across European countries, focusing on issues of economic injustice, climate injustice, etc. And so it was very interesting to hear coming back concerns around polarization, concerns around lack of transparency, concerns around agency. But my question, and this is almost also building on the points that was just made, is what can we do to improve accountability of those who are actually in positions of power? Because there's a lot of frustration, particularly amongst young people, that they participate, they engage, but where is the accountability when they do put forward things? Thank you.
Thank you for that. I hear there is legislation in one EU member state that says that politicians can get fired if they're lying on the job. So maybe already here. Let's hear from our speakers who would like to answer on accountability. Please do.
I have a very short comment, because I was many times accused that I'm a technocrat. And actually, my explanation between the difference between the technocrat politician and classical politician was somehow that technocrats even want to read and understand, while politicians already know that they know. And they basically defend what they know, even if they actually don't know. So this accountability, it's a serious issue. And I think I think the whole debate which we have today, it's one thing which is constantly bothering me is it's actually the thin line between informing people and manipulating them. And we are definitely in a very intense age of manipulation. If you are, for example, anti-vax, then you will get through social media all necessary information that you are right. Not question you, but that you are right, because that's how the system works. How actually to do in science, we have peer reviewing, and we actually, but how, because if you allow the population to be massively manipulated, and then you basically make democratic inclusion of that manipulated population, it's so I think we need to go a bit to the core reasons which are somehow making this situation, which is leading us to quite untrustable and troubled waters, I think.
I see Ms. Fuchs wanted to come in already, so please do.
Yeah, answering to both your and your questions simultaneously. So accountability, if we talk about citizen assemblies, for instance, right, and they only make sense if the system as such has to respond to them, right? And there are different ways we could imagine that if there are recommendations from a citizen assembly, you need, you know, like a qualified majority from parliament not to implement them or not to take them. So you need mechanisms that force the elected politicians to take them serious. That doesn't mean they have to accept everything that citizen assemblies decide, because we have representative democracy. There may be good reasons, as you said, right? Yeah. You just need to hear what they are. But there are mechanisms that we can think about to ensure this accountability. But when it comes to the question of manipulation, I think we should own up that it's not a new phenomenon. Right, with private media around, we've always talked about the media as a fourth power in the state. So we've had manipulation before, but now we see it so much more. And indeed, we said one of the challenges for citizen assemblies or other such democratic innovations is to ensure real inclusivity. Another one is to ensure information that is not manipulative, right? And knowing that you only have a limited time to bring the necessary information across. But you need it there because otherwise you can't have solid deliberation, solid decision making. So that's another big challenge where we still have to work on our methods.
Thank you. We have one question over there.
Hello. So Christophe Gouache, I'm a designer and practitioner of, I would say, democratic innovations. And I just wanted to echo what was said regarding this question of setting up honest opportunities for participation. So the problem is we're facing, I mean, the more we have democratic innovations and participatory processes, pretty good for, you know, developing culture of participation. But at the same time, we have an increasing risk, of course, of participation washing, just like we had, you know, greenwashing. So the visuals and everything of participation, but with no actual intention of doing anything behind. So I do have the feeling that also when we provide those opportunities for participation, we tend to keep a bit of a doing it. So even when you look in a way at the European Citizens Initiative platform, which is great in itself, it makes citizens believe they can have a direct impact. It's not true. And it's okay that it's not true. It brings their voice to the table, but their voice is one amongst many others, amongst the political debate, amongst the lobbying influence, amongst, it's just one more. So in a way, we should also be super honest from the beginning to say, even on those platforms and other platforms, to say, okay, guys, we don't promise anything. You will be part of the influence play and so on. And we did that a couple of years ago for a research project called Simulact, which was on citizens' voice to research, EU research agenda. And from the very beginning, we said to citizens, to the 1,000 citizens involved, what we are doing together will not necessarily have any impact. And we're super honest with you. We can promise that we'll do our best to influence, but there is no guarantee at all. And I think just by saying that and assuming that from the beginning, citizens said, okay, at least it's clear, we'll see, but there is no fake promise or, wrong expectation.
Thank you for that. I heard quite some reactions and noddings, but we already have one other comment or question, and then we see if we have some closing one before I go back to our speakers. And sorry, just before you, I wanted to check and make sure in case we have questions online, just to let me know. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, my name is Van der Jager, social psychologist and also into complexity dynamics. I was a bit triggered by manipulation. There's a lot of talk, of course, about misinformation and disinformation. I think that's playing a very important role. And what I would like to emphasize is that we are dealing with a lot of very complex issues. Think about climate, think about migration, think about COVID. All these issues are so complex that it's very difficult to understand it, even as a scientist. Now, if you mind that a lot of people try to develop a kind of narrative to make sense of the world, you can also understand that you can have different narratives and that each narrative can be fed with facts from a very complex data set. And this may result that you end up with groups of people having radical different perceptions, and they both think they are fact-based, right? So I think that one of the big challenges to get out of this situation is to develop education, educate our citizens in accepting that the world is more complex than it fits in your own mind, and that you have a kind of attitude to listen to people that have a different perspective than you have. I think this is a very fundamental skill that you need in a democracy, listening to people with different perspectives, because they may have valuable information that you do not have.
Thank you for that. I'm quickly checking if there is, I think we have one question online, and then I would like to go back to the speaker. Yes.
We have an online question, perhaps more suited for the researchers. It's referencing Inesh's presentation. Ruth is asking, I'm curious about how impactful grassroots approaches are over time compared to the top-down approach that was mentioned. Is there some way to measure this? Or is it just a general observation based on the impact grassroots activities have had in the past?
Okay, thank you. I'll get that. The reason I made that statement was mainly because of our case study research, which was not quantitative, it was qualitative. So we didn't measure any impact in terms of grassroots top-down. What we did notice in a qualitative perspective was that follow-up, continuity, embeddedness of the project's ideas were stronger in grassroots movements, local movements like alternative political movements, grassroots movements for education on sustainability, for instance, local movements that were organized kind of more or less spontaneously between civil society organizations and citizens. When compared to a one-time citizen assembly, a one-time conference on the future of Europe, where we found that based on our interview data, citizens were not really convinced that their proposals were really being given the follow-up they had expected, but they also not really impressed by the fact that this was a one-time process, that not only the policies were not having continuity, but the process itself ended there. So it was in that sense that I think there's a learning to be made by the fact that grassroots action, maybe because it arises spontaneously by citizens, but again, only some type, and I want to here emphasize what Doris has said, is that the people that tend to participate in these grassroots initiatives, they are already involved in some ways. They are the people that usually go to meetings, they are the activists normally, although some of these initiatives did manage to involve people who were more from less active communities. The majority are very active. And here, the top-down initiatives score higher because they try to get a mini public that is as representative or diverse as possible, that includes people from less represented communities. So there's some trade-offs, there's learnings that have to be made, but we don't have a quantitative measure of impact between grassroots and bottom-up. I don't think that still exists, to my knowledge, in studies being done. So that would be another research project. A good idea for another research project, actually.
Thank you for that. I want to come back to our speakers and give each of them the floor, maybe for maximum 2 minutes. We've heard a lot today. We've heard about some good examples, some ideas that are popping up in research that could inform. We heard about recommendations on what institutions can do different or better. I also want to maybe say that what I personally hear is that when we hear about decline in trust in institutions, about manipulation, about exclusion of certain voices from civic participation, that maybe this is the tip of the iceberg. Maybe we still need to talk about institutional reform. Maybe we still need to talk about systemic approaches of the root causes of oppression and injustice in Europe. But I'm really, I guess, with this in mind, my question to each speaker is going to be, if you had one democratic innovation that you think we really need to live with from today, we are at the end of the day in the European Parliament. It's a very good house to bring such recommendations. What would be for you one innovation that you would like to see the European Parliament or European institutions taking forward to improve civic participation in the future of Europe? And I will do the popcorn method, meaning that whoever is ready to pop, if you feel your oil is hot enough, you can just give me a sign and you can take the floor so we don't put anyone under pressure. Take your time, think about it. One democratic innovation.
I can start, unless somebody else wants to start. So my democratic innovation would be permanent citizen assemblies, and partly exactly for what you mentioned just now, also in terms of more systemic reform, because I do think we need them to counter the power of vested interest that we have in the political system, both at the European level and at the national level also. But having said that, from our research, we are just fundamentally aware that such citizen assemblies, they need to be sophisticated in terms of their methods, sophisticated for methods for inclusion, for information provision, for social learning, something Wanda mentioned. That's the idea, right? Bringing citizens together to be able to listen to each other, to learn from each other and with each other, and for transparency and impact. All of that requires sophistication, and that in turn requires resources. You can't get this on the cheap. Right, and therefore I'm going to sneak in a second in DI, and that's the democratic allowance, because one of the resources is you need citizens there who have the time, who have the willingness to participate, whatever their background is.
Thank you for that. Please.
I think it makes sense to add on to that, because we have already something that resembles permanent citizen assemblies at the EU level, which are the European citizen panels that are somewhat institutionalized, that have a budget, that have a staff in DG communication, etc. So I wonder, working with them, I wonder how to increase their impact. And for me, there's different avenues of how to do that. But one, for example, is to pair them also and to interlink them better with other tools that we have at the EU level at the moment already. For example, when we talked about the ECI, I always wonder why that shouldn't be, for both instruments, be a very promising way forward to connect an ECI that has been successful and to connect it to a follow-up process that involves a European Citizen Panel, where basically not only the 1 million signatures that were more on the activist side have a say, but also the randomly selected representative sample of the population also gives their say on that. We have, for example, also national and local dialogues that we could bring in and interconnect better in a multi-level approach with the European Citizen Panels. And we could make it, as I think you said it as well, mandatory as part of the public consultation process of key legislative proposals. I think that would be very important to interlink and integrate it better, and even interconnect it better with the public and make it more visible, because there's, I think you said it as well, there's very interesting stories, very human-centered stories to tell from these processes, transformations that happen and that can be very communicated very easily, actually, and the public could connect with very easily. So I think there's a lot to do in terms of public communication also about the citizen assemblies and panels.
Thank you. Just 1 second. Do we continue?
Yeah, I think the Citizens Panel is a really interesting exercise organized by the Commission. I don't have personally favorite exercise. I do think that depends very much on the topic, and also on if you are doing it at a national, regional, or local level. And again, from my perspective, I don't think we should see it as one size fits all. I think countries are different and they have their own national culture and history, and some exercise are more applicable in some contexts than others. I do think, again, from work that colleagues in the JRC have been doing, and I would like just to leave that, is really how can we take public spaces, physical public spaces, in a more creative and original way. Because, of course, most of the things now are happening, or conversations are happening online. And if we should go back into using actually more physical spaces besides the citizen engagement initiatives.
Thank you for that. And Patricia, we come to you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I totally agree that the permanent formats of citizens' deliberation at the European level are a great idea. And to some degree, yes, they exist. But I think, I mean, we've been talking about true representation. I mean, how are they truly representative of European population? I'm not sure what the recent developments have been in the panels, but at the time of the Conference of the Future of Europe, even the question whether the conference is truly representative was a taboo. We tried to brought that up at the time, and it was really brushed away, like, oh, we can't ask people about, who they are, and, and it was really taboo. So I'm wondering, like, where we are with representation. We talked about the right to response. Indeed, the panels exist, but there's no right to response. And I think there's still also kind of innovation possible in terms of how do we make sure that, yes, we bring people to the table with their own needs that they have today, but also to encourage them to think beyond their own needs today. Like, how do we bring in, for instance, the perspective of future generations, the perspective of kind of the natural environment that we usually don't think about. And I think there's innovations that are already being in the experimentation to also include kind of perspectives beyond my own today perspective. But final thought, I do think, as I said before, we really need to go back to the basics, because if we currently see policy making that is not based on evidence, that is doing away with impact assessments, that is doing away with the very basic consultation process with the argument of, oh, there's an emergency, there's a crisis, which, by the way, is a very authoritarian way of making policy. Oh, there's a permanent emergency, so sorry, folks, no scrutiny, no transparency, no consultation. We really have to go back to the basics. There was an attempt last year to come up with an interinstitutional ethics body to establish basic ethical standards and transparency and accountability standards across the institutions. That failed because of a majority of the conservatives with the far right. So again, it's back to the basics to bring at least the, what we consider the centrist political forces back into really a debate about basic democratic features, because I think even with innovations, if the foundations are shaky, we're not gonna win much.
Thank you for that. So innovations, yes, but also respect what's there, right? Go back to the basics of democratic processes whenever they are impeded on.